Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to this video for the Free Motion Quilting Project. In this video, I'd like to share some tips for piecing a log cabin block. I used log cabin blocks to piece this new background for a new version of Express Your Love. It's been really fun. It's not been super time consuming because I've used some special tools along the way to make it go a little faster. And okay, so let me share with you what I've done. I have used this die cutter from AccuQuilt Go, and you can see here it's laid out so that you can cut all of the pieces. They're 1.5 inch strips for a log cabin block, and this is actually going to cut enough fabric for a 12-inch block. Now, I didn't actually piece 12-inch blocks. I pieced 6-inch blocks and some 3-inch blocks. It just how I put my background particularly together, this is the size that I used. But just in case you're wanting to piece a full 12-inch block, here's my tip. First off, I never cut my fabric exactly to the size of the die, simply because it's going to have a very good chance of shifting ever so slightly, and you might not end up with a full piece along this edge. So I always make sure that my fabric is both wider on all sides, both lengthwise and widthwise, so that way I know it's going to fully cover the die completely. And in order to line everything up and make sure that I'm cutting these strips on the straight of grain so that the grain of the fabric is nice and straight, I like to mark a line about 1 inch from one edge. So I just lined up my ruler here and marked this with a permanent magic marker. And I found that about 1/2 inch was fine for this side, just simply how I was lining things up. And then whenever I cut my fabric, I like to cut it so it was a rectangle. You can use scraps with this and that works just fine, but it was really most convenient to cut a rectangle that was about 8 inches by 24 inches and then line up that cut edge right on that line. And you can layer about 4 pieces of fabric on this die at a time and then cover it with your mat and then run it through your AccuQuilt Go, and it cuts everything all at once. It's very, very convenient. Now, do you absolutely have to have an AccuQuilt Go cutter and this die? All this stuff is expensive, and the answer is absolutely not. You can simply take yardage and cut 1.5 inch strips, and then you're going to need to cut out each piece for your block. And I did these in a pretty interesting way. How I set up mine, I was using scraps of this kind of one print. It's a polka dot batik that I was using here. And I used that for what I call the dominant side, the side that has more, it kind of takes up more of the square itself. I call that the dominant side. So it took up that side of the block. Over here, I was actually using scraps of several different colors. All of them were blue, different shades, different values of blue, but they all kind of work together. And the best tip for finding fabrics that work well together, hang them all up on the wall, step back, take a look at them, take a picture of them. Spend some time looking at that picture. If any of them stand out garishly, like if I had accidentally thrown a teal in this, it really would have stood out quite a bit. Pull that particular fabric, take another picture, and chances are you're going to have a nice blend. The thing to keep in mind, have some lights, have some darks, have a nice range of whatever color you're using, and then you're going to end up with this nice mottled effect. A lot of people have commented that they really like this effect, and it's just a simple matter of selecting fabrics that work well together. So how to cut this out? It's really very simple. If you cut simple strips, all you're going to need is 2 1.5 inch squares of both your, what I'm going to call recessive and dominant colors. Kind of my biology degree is coming out. I call this side recessive simply because it's taking up less part of that block. So you're going to need a 1.5 inch square for each. You're going to need a 2.5 inch square for each. Rectangle. So it's 2.5 inches by 1.5 inches, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5. And then you'll just need 1 6.5 inch strip of your dominant color. So that's pretty simple. I am going to write all this up on the Free Motion Quilting Project, so of course you can see the exact cutting for this particular block if you're wanting to make this exact same background that I'm making. Now, the thing to keep in mind is, whenever you have a chance to cut things in strips and you're cutting from yardage, it's going to be a lot more accurate because you're cutting with a rotary cutter, you're using your ruler, you're lining everything up, you can double and triple check your cuts. However, that's more time consuming. And you know, there's that war between perfection and having everything cut perfectly is really the start to having everything pieced perfectly. But also there's time, and cutting every single one out individually is very time consuming. And I pieced, I want to say, a total of 30 to 32 blocks for this quilt top. So that's a lot of cutting, that's a lot of piecing. And sometimes taking shortcuts is really how to get yourself to the next step. And the thing about this is it does not have to be perfect. We're going to be putting a goddess on top of this whole thing. All her breath, all those elements are still going on top of this. So I don't think anyone's going to look at this super close and get nitpicky about matching seams. I think you can get away with quite a lot. So personally, I grabbed my AccuQuilt Go die and the cutter, and that worked out just fine. So let's get on the machine and see how this actually pieces up. It's super, super simple. It's actually very intuitive, but I just want to share some few tips that I picked up along the way. Okay, so now it's time to get started piecing, and the first thing you're going to notice is I am not using my Janome Horizon. I actually piece on my Bernina Activa 210, or I have another older Bernina at 1230, the old record 1980s 1230. I simply like to piece on Berninas. They have a really, really wonderfully designed patchwork foot that has 1/4 of an inch on both sides. It's very easy to see what you're doing. That's what I started piecing on, that's what I piece on now. So stick with what you know, stick with what works for you, but I prefer to piece on Berninas. So let's get started. So I've got my 2 squares ready to go on the sewing machine, and those are 1.5 inch squares, and I'm just going to start stitching right through. And I do want you to notice I'm always ending with my needle in the down position. If I stop, the needle's down. It's really important for piecing, because if the needle is up, if I'm pulling on this right now, the whole thing would have slid around and been really obnoxious. What this is a scrap charger. I always buzz through with my piece, then I buzz through with a scrap charger. If I was chain piecing, I of course would go to the next piece. Now I know Bonnie Hunter and her famous leaders and enders, she would just piece, half square triangles, something along those lines. I personally prefer the scrap charger simply because I'm not a big time piecer, and I like that because I don't have to think about it, I don't have to go prepare fabric. Maybe one of these days I'll get my act together and have some leaders and enders setting here ready to go. Now, as for machine settings, as I finger press this open, I'll tell you my machine settings. I have my needle down, I have my stitch length set to 1.5 millimeters. The simple fact of the matter is you want these stitches to be very tight, very close together. The factory machine settings are now 2 millimeters, 2.5 millimeters. That's really a wide stitch. And you want these pieces to be very solidly put together and not in any way going to be coming out. And the simple fact of the matter is shortening that stitch length is what's going to give you that. Also, I press my seams open. And a lot of people really hate that about me. I always press my seams open because it really impacts the quilting. It's so much easier to quilt over a seam if those seams are spread out on both sides. Now, there's certain blocks, like hexagons, you can't do that because you want to have that nice arrangement of everything layering out right where all the hexagons meet. So there are certain blocks I would say, yeah, press to one side. But 99% of the time I press my seams open. And the reason I can get away with it is because of that short stitch length, because those stitches are so tight together. No batting is ever going to come through that seam. It's never going to come unpicked. It's never going to have a problem because you started with that very tight stitch length. So now the next piece, I'm going to take a dominant color, and this is my 2.5 inch. It's just, we're going to go up each size. So I've got my 2.5 inch strip. I'm going to keep going through that scrap charger and then layer that under. And when you see my foot lift, it's just I'm using my knee lifter there. And these are really convenient blocks to chain piece. The only thing to keep in mind is just having everything laid out, and especially if you're doing multiple colors of blue, you just want to have a nice arrangement of multiple colors so that way you don't have the same 2 colors right next to each other. Again, after every single piece is pieced into your little arrangement, finger press it open and then press. I've got my iron right here below my sewing table so I can press at the same time. And press that open, so as you go around, each one's pressed open. So right now it looks something like this. We've got a little, it's now a 2.5 inch square. Now we have our non-dominant color, and I just kind of go around in a ring. So I've got my two squares together, I've got my long rectangle here. Now I'm going to put this one just like this. And this arrangement, you know, you really don't have to get too picky with it. Log cabins are not difficult simply because they're fairly obvious how they go together. However, it's easy to get the dominant recessive sides of the block kind of mixed up. And so you really want to, here's what I did, at least. I'll just tell you what I did. I pieced a block, one single block, just like this, went through all the steps, didn't chain piece, I just went through all the steps of one single block, and then I had that block setting by my machine so I could always refer back to it anytime that I was sitting there going, huh, well which step is next? Well, go look at the block, because that's what I'm wanting. Log cabins are only tricky in as you go around the ring, which color you choose next, so that when it finishes out, you've got more of the side that you wanted. You know, the dominant recessive thing is correct. Okay, so now we've got something that looks like this. Now I'm going to grab my 3.5 inch strip and layer it on just like that. And what I love about log cabins is that they are so simple to piece. And as you go through them, if you chain piece, I was chain piecing 10 at a time for this quilt, which was really convenient because you can just buzz through them. You know, all you know is, okay, well I need to go cut out 10 3.5 by 1.5 inch strips and then bring them back to the machine, and then you can just buzz through it. It's very, very quick. At this point, 3.5 inches, we're just going to keep on 3.5, then the 4.5, then the 5.5. And I'll meet you back here as I'm sewing on the last few blocks. Okay, so we are to right here, and at this point it is a 5.5 inch block. And you can see pretty much all I've done is added my 4.5 inch strip. Actually, there's a 3.5 inch strip in the dark blue, then a 4.5 inch strip up the side, so then it was a 4.5 inch spot, 4.5 inch of the blue, of the lighter blue, the recessive, and then a 5.5 inch strip over here. And so as it builds, it continues to go up 1 inch at a time. And so at this point, I'm going to do a 5.5 inch of the dark blue, and then a 6.5 inch, just one 6.5 inch strip on the side, and then it'll be done. So that's it for this video. My name is Leah Day, and I really hope that you've enjoyed learning these tips on piecing a log cabin block. Just remember that when piecing something like this, you really do need to keep those seam allowances in mind. We're going to have a lot of layers in this quilt, and even though when we baste it you won't be able to see those seam allowances, the simple fact is they're still there, and they're going to cause a lot of issues in the quilting unless they're pressed open. So make sure to press those seams open, and of course, if you have any questions, definitely ask and share your own log cabin blocks on the Free Motion Quilting Project. That's at freemotionproject.com. Until next time, let's go quilt.